What's up, guys? Welcome back to the question where you have the questions and I have the answers. And today I'm just going to be ranting about The Wind Rises, which for those of you who don't know is a Studio Ghibli movie, which I know not all Studio Ghibli movies are fantasy kids movies, and a lot of them have important messages about Japanese history, Japanese culture, and technology versus tradition. And this movie, while it is certainly not my favorite Studio Ghibli movie, it does something incredibly important that I just need to rant about to a wider audience because I think it's absolutely great. This isn't really a review. This isn't really a historical or political lesson. It's kind of a mix of all the above. It's just going to be me rambling about the incredible thing that I think this movie does. So for those of you who don't know, The Wind Rises is the last movie of Studio Ghibli to be created by Miyazaki, who was the main creator and one of the founders of Studio Ghibli in 1986. The Wind Rises came out in 2013, and honestly, it is a both powerful way to go out. Like, I know he's planning on coming out of retirement to make one last movie, but The Wind Rises is such a high note to end on. It's definitely not one of my favorites. It is definitely not one of the best movies, but it does something incredible, which I keep alluding to. We're going to get to it eventually. Anyway, The Wind Rises is about Jiro Hirakoshi, who is an aeronautical engineer living before and during World War II. He is a real engineer who worked before and during World War II, but the movie shows a fictional portion of his life, which is also based off of a book. Not his book. It's a French book called The Wind Has Risen, and The Wind Has Risen is about a person whose wife is sick and dying, and he is trying to carry on with this knowledge and love her to her final days. So of course, in addition to the cool historical stuff I'm going to be talking about, there is romantic undertones, but I'm not going to focus on that. If you want to hear about that, watch the movie. I highly recommend it. It is on HBO Max. Now the question is, what is this message? Before we get to that, I'm going to give you a bit of backstory about how this comes up. So Japan at the time is not the technical spectacle that we have today. You know, they're not the future of technology. They're not the leaders of anything, you know? And it's stated multiple times in the movie by both Jiro and his co-workers and friends that Japan technologically is like 20 years behind the rest of the world, or at the very least the Western world. And because of this, they make a deal with Germany that they can send their engineers to Germany and basically learn from and copy off of German technology so that Japan can use it to become more innovative. However, what the main character Jiro does not know is that this is supposed to be used specifically for World War II, which they don't see happening. Is because, unbeknownst to Jiro, Japan is militarizing very quickly. And he doesn't know this. He just wants to make really beautiful airplanes because to him, airplanes are children's dreams. And it's so beautiful and fantastic. But we, the audience, know that currently Japan is transitioning from its empire to a puppet empire run by a military dictatorship. But Jiro doesn't know that yet. He doesn't know that that's what he's helping. He just knows that Japan wants to become more technologically innovative, and he would like to help with that. But at the same time, he's in Germany, and Germany in the 1920s to 30s is transitioning from its Treaty of Versailles poverty to Hitler's rising dictatorship and fascism. And so that's portrayed as seeing the secret police try and bully the Japanese engineers because they don't want to betray all of Germany's secrets because Hitler did not trust Japanese students, Japanese engineers, until it was eventually convinced to him that he can utilize Japan in order to conquer like the rest of the world, which he never did, but he was like, if we have a foothold in Japan, we can get the rest of Asia, which didn't end up happening. So we can see the signs of the descent into fascism and dictatorship, but Jiro can't. And Miyazaki uses that foresight of we know what's going to happen to then lay this message. Later in the movie, Jiro is speaking with someone from Germany, and they're discussing, oh, we think both our countries are going into the way of war, but we don't know war with who. They don't have enough political foresight to understand what World War II is going to be, or that it's even going to happen. We just ended the war to end all wars, and we know the war is coming, but we don't know what or why or how or when. And the guy from Germany goes to Jiro. He's like, oh, I love Japan. Why I love Japan? And Jiro's like, why? And he said, because Japan is a good place for forgetting. And Jiro goes, well, what do you mean it's a good place for forgetting? And the guy goes, oh, because you forget everything. You leave the League of Nations, forget about it. You instill a puppet state in Manchuria, you forget about it. And he goes off to list like a bunch of shifty or shady things that the Japanese government is doing at this time that Jiro doesn't even know about. And Miyazaki put that in there not to alert Jiro of the coming war or that Japan is doing these things. He puts it in there for us, the audience, to know that, hey, Japan did terrible things, and this is just the beginning of the terrible things that are to come. I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive analysis / historical commentary. If you haven't, please check out The Wind Rises. It's definitely not one of Studio Ghibli's best movies, but it is very informational, very impactful. It's on HBO. That being said, have an amazing summer. So long, and thanks for all the fish. Be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. If you haven't already, please hit like, please leave a comment, please share to your friends who you think would also be interested in this, and subscribe if you are new. I just make random content sometimes. Usually it's of the strain of either a film review, in-depth analysis, which I guess is what this is. This is kind of an analysis video. And sometimes I do historical and political education videos, which this could also be seen as. It's a deep analysis / educational video about The Wind Rises and Japan's history during World War II. Without further ado, let's get started. Anyway, Jiro Hirakoshi, as depicted in the movie, is a boy with very bad eyesight, and because he cannot see very well, he cannot fulfill his dreams of becoming a pilot. Instead, he decides to become an aeronautical engineer for Japan. And during this time, which is stated to be, I think the movie begins in 1923 and ends around somewhere in the late 1930s. So, basically midway between World War I and World War II, all the way up to the beginning of World War II is when this movie takes place. And in that movie, we see Japan. We see Japan as it was during this time period, and we're seeing Japan interacting with the rest of the world from Jiro's point of view. So it's not commentary that we're seeing any big message from Miyazaki through Jiro. Miyazaki is banking on the idea that we, as the audience from the future, know of the events that are about to occur. We know about Japan and Germany during World War II, and that is what he's banking on in order to make this movie as impactful as it was. And I say that because he writes things and he portrays things in such a way where it's like, it's very latent in the movie, but because we have the knowledge of future events, we know what's happening. We know what's going to happen despite the fact that Jiro doesn't. We're automatically smarter than the main character, and that's his gimmick. That's what he's working with in order to make the messages he's gonna make so important. Now you're probably wondering, okay, but why was it phrased that way? Why was it phrased, Japan is good at forgetting, if, you know, these people weren't aware of it because it's just happening, they weren't aware that it's bad? It's because, once again, as I said, it's not intended for Jiro, it's intended for us, the audience, and it's not referencing just those events. It's referencing what was to come during World War II. For those of you who don't know, and it's most likely that you don't, because the whole point of the forgetting line exactly is that we never talk about it. It never comes up, especially Japan. Japan never talks about what they do in World War II or what they did in World War II. Because, as I said earlier, the peaceful, technologically advanced Japan is new. It is recent. This was not the Japan that we are seeing before and during World War II. During World War II, not only did they bomb Pearl Harbor, which is what we remember the most because we're Americans, they invaded China, they invaded Korea, and they commit the worst human atrocities, I think, of the region. Comparable to Western colonialism and slavery, comparable to the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide. You know, they did the rape of Nanking, which was basically Japanese soldiers would enter Nanking and they would hunt Chinese citizens for sport. They would publish in the newspaper, you know, the kill count that each officer had to see who had won for the week. Same thing with women. They would count and score how many women they had raped for the week. Same thing in Korea. They took women and kidnapped them and took them as their, like, pleasure dolls or their wives. And it was awful. They did unethical science experiments on living people of these regions. Like, the reason we know that 75% of the human body is made of water is because they dried out people and recorded that. And arguably the worst thing to come of all of that atrocious death and inhumane treatment of these two countries is that Japan got off scot-free. There was no consequence for the things they did. They were never held internationally accountable at all. They never once officially apologized for these actions. They just got away with it. And that is something that bothers Miyazaki. And so he put that line of Japan is good at forgetting because Japan is really good at making sure we forget that this happened. Because you will never hear anyone in the Japanese government talk about it, own up to it. There have been multiple calls by Chinese and Korean citizens be like, hey, could you release like a public apology acknowledging that you did these horrible things to our countries? And Japan won't. You know, so while Japan looks and has like recreated its image, you know, now they're the future of technology. Now they're one of the safest places in the world to live. And now it's all anime and, you know, cute Japanese culture. But they were horrible and they did horrible things and you're never gonna know about it. And so this movie was Miyazaki going, hey, you know this happened. It is wrong that we aren't acknowledging it. And so that is what that line was for. It was Japan is good at forgetting because you know what you did and you know it is wrong that we did not face any consequence for what we did. You know, because the movie also parallels Germany and Japan and ties them together. You know, Germany is facing a descent into dictatorship. Japan is facing a descent into dictatorship. And another thing that the German man says is that, you know, because of this, Germany's going to explode. You know, it's not going to end well for us. Japan's going to explode. It's not going to end well for you guys. But between the two, who did very similar horrible things. Germany lost the right to be Germany, basically, you know? After, you know, the death of Hitler, Germany was divided 4 ways, and control of each of those parts was given to a different European country. Japan faced no consequences. You know, we bought the research that they did, the unethical research. We bought that from them. They got bombed, you know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but that wasn't because they did those horrible things. That's because they bombed Pearl Harbor, you know? There was no actual ever consequence for what they did to China and Korea. And so, yes, Germany exploded. Japan exploded. But it only really ended poorly for Germany in the long run. I mean, both of them have recovered quite well. Only one of them has the good reputation. You know, we think of Germany, and all we think about is the Holocaust, you know, and World War II and World War I. You think of Japan, and you think of, like, utopia on Earth in a way. And Miyazaki is saying with this movie, that's not how it is. That's not how it was, and we need to recognize that.